This is section 5.1, part 3. All right, so this is one of those key concepts that we really, really want to make sure we understand. And that's this idea of what does it mean to be unusual? What does it mean for a probability, or if we know something about the probability, what does it take for us to then label that outcome or event as unusual? And our right now, until we get to chapter 9 and 10, basically, we're going to have kind of just a default. So, unusual basically means there's a very low chance of the outcome or event occurring randomly. And so there's the simplest way that we're going to deal with it right now is just to say any time that our probability of whatever event we're looking at, if it is less than 5%, so if the probability of our event is less than 5%, then we will say it is unusual. And later, I'm just going to go ahead and give you a heads up. We will change this number. And this 5%, that we might change it to 1% or 2% or 10%. It will depend on the situation. But we'll actually have a name for it. And that name is actually going to be, I'm going to go ahead and tell you just so you can kind of be aware of it. Right now, this is an existence level thing. Later, it will be something that you need to know. But for right now, this 5% is what we're calling our significance level, or what we will call our significance level. And it's basically saying this is the threshold, this is the cutoff, this is the point where we say, nope, if it's less likely than this, then we just don't think it's going to happen. Of course, it could happen. I mean, a 4% chance of something happening means that there's a 4 in 100 chance that it might happen. And so if we kept doing this over and over and over again, about 4 times out of 100, it would happen. But that's our significance level. So that's our cutoff. And like I said, later, when we get into chapter 9 and 10, we'll start talking about this a little bit more. And we'll start changing that number from 5% to another number. But for the time being, whenever we're asking if something is unusual or not, we're always just going to compare it to 5%. I wanted to talk just a second more about this idea of what we're going to be doing when we end up using this idea, because I really want you to understand that this is one of those lifetime. You're going to need to know this even beyond the end of this class. Because this is really kind of one of those key things of statistical thinking while you're watching the news, you're reading something on social media or in an article somewhere. You're listening to the radio. Your friend spouts off some number and a percentage or something and tries to tell you something. This is one of those things where you want to make sure you understand and know enough about statistics to validate what they're saying or to question what they're saying. And for anybody, I'm not trying to get political or anything like that. Just when someone gives me a number, like the first thing I do is question how reasonable it is. There's a joke that, and of course this number changes every time somebody says it because that's part of the joke. But it's something like, 94% of all statistics are made up on the spot. including that one. You always want to make sure, questioning, making sure, where did you get that data? How do you know that this is something that we might call significant? And that's a definition that we'll talk about later in the semester. But this idea of what does it mean to be unusual? So what we're going to do when we do a hypothesis test. So now let me just go ahead and tell you, this is something we're going to do in chapter 10. So we are not there yet. I am not going to try and go into all of our details of what this hypothesis test is or anything like that. But we're going to work our way up to figuring out a way to find, what's the probability that our sample or experiment gives, a value, here, whatever number, or more extreme. Now that more extreme could mean that number or less, if it's below average, that number or more, if it's above average. So I know that's kind of weird wording, but just what are the chances of me getting something like this? And we're going to have a number. We're going to have a way to get a probability. And we're going to call that a p-value. And I'm trying this. This is new. I've not done it. I want you all to start off with the right language, though, so it doesn't look like we're doing something new when we get to chapter 10. This is still just a probability. When we call it a p-value, that's just I don't know why. I don't know why we call it a p-value instead of the probability, but we do. And so this probability that we get, this p-value, is going to be a certain number. And then we're going to say, okay, I'm going to make something up. Let's say I get a p-value of 0.0274, blah, blah, blah. And these are never nice numbers. This is, and we'll talk about why, but these are always numbers that just go off your screen on your calculator or on your computer. So I've got some p-value, and then I want to know, is that unusual? Well, for what we're doing right now, yeah, that's less than 5%, so that's unusual. And if we have something like that, when we have something unusual, basically what that's going to do is that's going to give us evidence. That's going to give us the evidence we need to do our hypothesis test, or to finish out our hypothesis test and make whatever conclusion, write out our conclusion. So we're not going to get into all the extra details of that, but that's what we're doing. That's why this is so important, this idea of unusual, because we're going to keep using that at the end of July when we're finishing out chapter 10 and chapter 4. I know that's weird. We're doing chapter 4 at the end, but that's how it works. When we're doing those last chapters, this is still going to be a concept that we're going to pull back to time and time again. So this is one of those important ones that you really want to make sure you've got. Is something unusual? What does it mean? It means that it's far away from what we expected.